Chapter 8, a scandalous freedom. Early on in the fanfare of his public appearances, Jesus gives what will become known as the famous Sermon on the Mount. This is a big moment for Jesus. He has laid out in detail his understanding of a life that pleases God. He has, so to speak, driven a stake in the ground. His star is ascending. Crowds are growing, and the religious leaders are watching his every move. Watch what Jesus does next. Large crowds followed Jesus as he came down the mountainside. Suddenly, a man with leprosy approached Jesus. He knelt before him, worshiping. "Lord," the man said, "if you want to, you can make me clean." Jesus touched him. "I want to," he said. "Be healed." And instantly, the leprosy disappeared. That sounds like a very nice Bible story, until you understand what Jesus has done. First, the leprosy thing. Few of us have met a leper. Okay, the word has become hijacked by the religious haze. We don't really have a reaction to it other than, poor guy. So substitute AIDS. Think of the public attitude, especially early on in the AIDS crisis, when people were afraid to go to their dentist for fear of catching it. Okay? Picture this man as someone in the late stages of AIDS. Emaciated body, nearly bald, wheezing, face ravaged by ulcers. Second, the Jewish attitude towards the infected. Lepers were required to cry out as they passed through a village, "Unclean, unclean," warning their neighbors lest unwitting citizens accidentally touch them and become defiled themselves. Leviticus made it clear anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes, let their hair be kept unkempt, and cover the lower part of their face and cry out. As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone outside the camp. Okay, so clothed in rags, bandana over their face, their hair dirty and matted. Talk about ostracism. In Israel at that time, to get within a stone's throw of someone so diseased was to jeopardize your own righteousness and reputation. So, that's the danger that Jesus is faced with. The man comes near Jesus, but not too near. What does Jesus do? He reaches out and touches him. The beauty of this is beyond words. Jesus doesn't need to come in contact with the man in order to heal him, right? There are many accounts where all he does is say the word and people are healed, even people a county away. And yet he touches him. Why? Because this is the one thing the man needs. No one has touched him for a very long time. To be starved for human touch is far worse than to starve for bread. The kindness of Jesus in this one act is enough to make me fall in love with him. But so is his scandalous freedom. Because now, Jesus is defiled, at least in the eyes of all the proper authorities he is. Jesus is just getting his ministry going. Okay? He has a message he needs to get across. Credibility is fairly important at this point. But here, in his very next move, after the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is almost guaranteeing he will be disqualified. Emotionally, politically, this would be the social equivalent of a rising priest or pastor giving their most important message of the year and then going outside onto the front porch of the church, lighting a cigarette and taking a good long shot of tequila straight from the bottle as the congregation files past, metaphorically speaking. Jesus doesn't seem to care. Or better, he cares very deeply about the right things. Okay? He knows exactly what he's doing. In the Sermon on the Mount, he completely overhauled their understanding of goodness. In a sort of moral Copernican revolution, he moves the concept of righteousness from the external to the internal. It is a far, far more demanding holiness, but one that will at the same time overturn legalism like a fruit cart. And then, almost as if to say, let me show you what I mean. we have this story. The risks Jesus is willing to take with his reputation are simply stunning. One more example. Now, one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went at the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume. And as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. And then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Whoa! This is another scandalous scene. This fallen woman is wiping Jesus' feet with her hair and kissing them? This is a very intimate encounter. She obviously has lost her capacity to care what the nice people think, and Jesus doesn't seem to have ever bothered trying that capacity on. This is utterly remarkable in the society of the religious, for the fear of man rules that world. What good people might think is a very, very powerful motivator and the reason for most of the ridiculous policies. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Can you believe the arrogant self-righteousness of these guys? It is a sinner who invited him to dinner. It is a sinner who is running the synagogue, too. Jesus answers patiently this time. Apparently, this Pharisee is open to a new way of understanding goodness. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher. He said, 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he canceled the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Having rescued Simon from the religious spirit, Jesus turns to attend to the precious heart of this brave woman who has entered so boldly, so humbly. She is exposed to the scornful stares of the other guests. They are whispering loudly. Jesus covers her. He turns toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house, yet you did not give me any water for my feet. But she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss. But this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. And therefore I tell you, her sins, though they may be many, have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who has been forgiven little loves little. And then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this, who even forgives sins? And Jesus says to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. If you don't understand this scene, you will not understand Christian holiness. And if you don't find this one of the most beautiful stories you have ever heard, you won't want Christian holiness. And you sure won't understand Jesus. The man is free. Free from what people think, free from religion, free from false obligation. People won't like it, won't understand it. They'll draw false conclusions, point fingers, and worse. He is free from that as well. Oh, to be so free. The more you fall in love with Jesus' genuine goodness, which is true goodness, the more you will absolutely detest the counterfeit of a false piety and a shallow morality, as he did. Jesus has a wild freedom born out of a profound holiness, which makes him the most remarkable person I've ever known.